Hey everybody, welcome to the latest Keyfactor webinar today on October 14th. I think we'll let people trickle in here and start in maybe 15, 20 seconds. Just take a sip of your coffee or your tea, get cozy, and we'll have a nice chat about automation here. Okay, I think we got our audience, Chris. So again, welcome. I'm Nathan Siegel. I hope you're ready. We're gonna have a nice chat about accelerating certificate lifecycle automation at scale, and I think we can move on to introduce ourselves. I'm a less familiar face than my co-host here, so I'll begin. Again, I'm Nathan Siegel, Keyfactor's product marketing manager, and I'm here as the Robin to my other host's Batman, as it were.
I'm not so sure about that, but
I am. And I've implied, Chris, he needs no introduction, but, Chris, I'd love to have you introduce yourself just real briefly.
with pleasure. Chris Hickman, Chief Security Officer here at Keyfactor, and thank you so much for asking me to participate with you today, Nathan. Looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, me too. Thank you, Chris, and thanks for, being here to carry the webinar on your shoulders as always. So I think we can get into what we're going to cover here today. We'll talk about some of the topics that are near and dear to the heart of our PKI champions who are currently trying to get automated in their organizations, including first, what the state of CLM, Certificate Lifecycle Management, is today, what can be done in terms of automation, how to do it successfully, and then we'll round it out with how to sell automation internally, right? How to get buy-in from the C-suite or the board, whoever's holding the purse strings at your organization. And I'd also like to mention here that we have a few results from a survey that we recently did at Keyfactor of 450 PKI and CLM practitioners, and we'll be stopping periodically a couple times throughout our chat just to poll you all on some similar questions. So keep drinking your coffee or tea, stay awake, and we'll have some fun with that.
Yeah, and we invite people to ask questions too, Nathan. So for those of you who are in our audience today, if you have questions, there's a little question mark on the right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to drop your questions in there, and as time permits, we'll absolutely try to answer them and or let you know what the answers are as we go through that relevant content.
Yeah, of course. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I'll keep an eye on the chat here. All right, so part one, the state of certificate lifecycle management today. So, Chris, where are we at today? What do manual workflows look like exactly for our boots on the ground people?
No, it's still amazing how many people are trying to manage digital certificates manually. It never ceases to amaze me that a surefire recipe for failure is cornerstone to so many people's day-to-day operations. Bit by bit, we're starting to sort of see a transition away from that, but the number of folks that we still talk to that try to manage things through spreadsheets or running around trying to deploy certificates manually is a ridiculous burden on the organization, and often with consequential outcomes.
Right. Some of these consequences are listed here too, right? They're kind of, shadow consequences of manual workflow.
Yeah, so we do see this, right, where because security team makes it difficult, I'm just going to go and do my own thing, and because the organization doesn't have a way to track that necessarily and do an inventory and have all of those, have that visibility, they often get away with it. So they'll go and they'll acquire certificates from sources other than those that are defined by the organization, or in a lot of cases end up paying for things that perhaps don't need to be paid for. We constantly service outages, and I know we're going to talk about that one a little bit more in depth. But things, when certs expire, things go down is the easy way to put it. And that just seems to be happening. It doesn't matter the size of the organization, big or small, they all come down when certs expire. And last but not least, the compliance gap. And I think compliance is becoming a really interesting area, especially as it relates to certificates of PKI. We're seeing more and more attention being given at point of audit around certificates from PKI, and I think organizations are realizing that that is happening. And things like PCI DSS now requires inventory, requires some management of certificates. We'll continue to see more of that as we go forward, especially as we sort of see this increased risk of post quantum needing to be managed as a risk, and organizations having to become compliant to mitigate that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot to, it's a big bite to take if you're working in PKI right now. It's a big burden. And I think that brings us to our first poll question. It'd be great to hear from everybody. In terms of just certificate lifecycle management right now, what are your biggest challenges? Is it the shortening life cycle? The difficulty of integrating and automating with your stack, compliance? Just love to hear from you. And while you're answering the poll question, we can go on to the results of a very similar question that we posed to our 450 PKI and certificate management practitioners. And we can see that insufficient staffing and expertise is tied with complexity and the shortening life cycle here. And that shouldn't be a surprise probably to you, Chris. I mean, we know how rare the expertise of a PKI professional is these days.
Absolutely, but how commonplace the use of certificates actually are. So it's a bit of a contradiction to begin with. So
yeah, that's true.
I think,
and it looks like
sorry. I'm watching our poll kind of fire off. So thank you everybody who's participated, and if you haven't already put your thoughts in, love to hear them. Yeah, I think what is particularly interesting in some of these results when I was looking through them is there is no clear winner here. There is no clear single thing. And as I look at, again, our results were sort of 50-50, tied. And that's indicative of the fact that there are multiple complexities that are a part of this landscape, and it's not just one thing that is driving the insanity, if you will, of your average PKI administrator. It's a multitude of things that are coming at you, constantly, and I think that is one of the things that we should probably. We will absolutely talk about here, where it's not just one thing causing another thing. It's actually it's a series of events that are coming at you constantly.
Yeah. From all angles, it's not an easy job these days.
Nope.
Probably one of the things making it hardest is the thing that's bringing us here today. It's the big and bold reason that we all know that CLM right now is hard, and it's getting harder. That it's mandated to change, and quickly. So we're all feeling it. And I don't know if you can make out some of these comments on Reddit. I'm sorry, they're a little bit fuzzy, but you can see this one gentleman. He would rather go to HVAC school than deal with certificates any longer in this environment.
Which is ironically, because probably what he fails to realize is all of HVAC now has certificates on it anyways, because it's all automated command and control. So it's not really running from the problem by moving into that industry.
Right, from the frying pan into the fire.
Indeed. I always like to ask people, when the CAB forum made this change, who got to vote on it? And when I'm in a room full of people, right, the reality is nobody puts their hand up, but it's highly impactful to all of us. The timeline to go down to the 47-day certs is relatively short. Interestingly enough, it also happens to come into effect right around the time where people should be starting to finish some of their post-quantum migrations and things like that. So this is really a significant and consequential result the CAB Forum has made, and it's going to materially change how organizations have to manage certificates. This is no longer a we can make do. This is a bound to fail unless automation is put in place. And yeah, as we're going to certainly explore, that's going to have its challenges as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think also it's interesting to talk about, why the CAB Forum has done this, right? I mean, we have increasing connectivity all over the world right now with AI taking over and container workloads and this and that. But is there anything else that you can, off the top of your head, understand, like why
yeah,
they've done it?
The main catalyst for it was to keep things like certificates, or more importantly, the keys associated with those certificates, limit the exposure. So if they were to be breached or stolen, instead of that leveraged entity, for want of a better term, being good for a year, it would have a much shorter lifespan, a shorter risk vector. Which makes sense, right? The intention is good. Let's keep ourselves as safe as possible online and on the internet. However, in doing so, it as the slide points out, right? It's a minimal 8x, probably closer to 12x now workload for each and every certificate that's deployed in your environment that is publicly rooted. So I think the intentions are great, but like I said, the people it impacts the most weren't in the room to also have a vote, which is an interesting circumstance.
Right. Well, isn't that always the case?
Indeed.
So this is actually something that I wanted to touch on briefly. How much pressure organizations are feeling about this 47-day lifespan, and it's a pretty decent amount of pressure already. With years until the lifespan is actually 47 days, which shouldn't surprise. It doesn't surprise us, and it probably won't surprise our audience either. This one doesn't come with an accompanying poll question. I just wanted to touch on it briefly. And that brings us nicely into our next chapter of the webinar, which is what can we do in terms of automation? What is possible, right? We know that Gartner is already talking about automation and the certificate lifecycle and management of. And interestingly and logically, for us, where they start is discovery, right? Specifically discovering all of your certificates and in real time. They make it a point to say in real time, live discovery. And I know, Chris, you have an approach for this. You have some ideas about why Gartner is highlighting this.
Yeah, I mean, you obviously can't automate and manage what you don't know you have, first and foremost.
Right.
So visibility is absolutely key. Yeah, the other thing is you've got to continuously monitor, and I think the reason why they point more to a live inventory is because you need to know not only was there a certificate gotten for that asset, was it deployed there properly, is that asset actually using it. Getting a certificate to, for instance, a web server is virtually useless when just dropping it in the file system unless you also configure what that application is and configure it properly to use that certificate. So, it's not only just a case of knowing how many certs do I have, it's knowing where do they live, what are they being used for, so on and so forth, so that I can be able to have actual automation versus just, some form of automated file transfer with manual configuration afterwards. So it does make a lot of sense to start there and then build from there, as we'll talk about a little bit here. Automation being successful is not a boil the ocean type of approach. It's let's take a few cups of water at a time, boil those, and then move on to the next few and the next few and the next few. Right.
Not everything can be automated, even if you wanted to, which is fair to mention.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to what is the value of automating, certain things, right? Some are more difficult to do than others. That's a reality. And I think you're right saying a lot of organizations, Nathan, look to lessen the burden by 90%, but rarely get to 100% because you're always going to have that one-off thing or those couple of use cases, and the cost to automate those and the effort to automate them might exceed the value of doing so. But if you can do the other 90% of your network, then you'll have time to deal with those one-offs, effectively, and be able to shepherd and manage them correctly.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why, bringing it back full circle is why discovery needs to be pretty close to 100%. You need to understand where your biggest risks are, your highest volume of certificates and your most critical services. And then you can start to boil those cups of water, right?
Absolutely.
So if you haven't automated much already, you're in the audience, that's okay, right? You're starting to boil your cups of water, as Chris would say. Total coverage in terms of automation is overkill. And as we'll see, the best way to automate is with a focus on risk and critical systems. And our poll results actually, or sorry, not our poll, but our survey results reflect this as well. More than half of the practitioners that we surveyed had one or a handful of services that they had automated certificate lifecycle management for. And so that means that there's another half that had only hadn't managed to automate much yet. And that's okay. But as the life cycle shrinks, I think this will get more contentious. And that brings us into the next area where automation is possible, which is self-service enrollment and certificate renewals. And I'd like to talk a little bit about EQ Bank, which is an excellent Keyfactor customer story that illustrates the power of automations for renewals specifically. I'm sure some of you are familiar with EQ Bank. They, with our help, automated certificate renewals across their banking infrastructure, and they eliminated manual processes that were previously consuming just gross amounts of IT resources and generating lots of risk. Specifically service disruption risk, which as we know is not something that banks are good at tolerating. And so when I say that they save 2 employees worth of manual certificate renewals using Keyfactor, it's not that they let go of 2 employees. It's that they were able to do 2 employees more worth of work with using automation.
And I think that's a super important thing to call out when you are properly automated. Your well-trained and well-paid security personnel can get on with the business of security and not have to worry about running around and doing the operations piece of trying to get certificates deployed and so on and so forth. Yeah, and I think to that point, nobody went to school to become a PKI administrator. You just sort of end up landing in that role for some reason. That's okay. Done it myself. Been at it for a long time. But the reality is that most of us got into security because we wanted to contribute to better security for our organizations, not run around with USB sticks with PFX files on them and trying to deploy them on web servers.
That paints a dangerous picture.
Indeed. And the other thing I would mention just on that EQ story is that is based on today's certificate standards. So take that down to 47 days now and imagine what that 2x personnel would really translate to into labor costs.
Yeah, and we'll touch on that in a little bit, but it gets pretty crazy. It's like an exponential investment in what otherwise would be manual work. So for our third automation possibility, provisioning, replacement, and root of trust, this is something that eclipses me a bit. So I'd like Chris to take the lead on this one, if you could.
Yeah, I mean, every CLM project starts out with the let's get a cert to something, right? That tends to be the number one use case that people obviously focus on. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we stop those certs from expiring? which is valid as well. So you need to get a new cert there. It needs to be renewed, needs to be replaced, needs to be bound to the application, which I mentioned earlier. The other thing, though, that's quite often overlooked is how do we manage the root of trust on that device? And root of trust management is a huge concern. A couple of good examples were when we went from SHA-1 to SHA-2 certificates a few years ago. The number one place where people failed in that transition with replacing the cert was they weren't also updating the root of trust, right? What happens when a CA is compromised and you want to withdraw trust for a particular chain of certificates? So root of trust management really becomes important. If we look what's ahead of us with respects to post-quantum and things of the sort, we're going to have to do a lot of trust store management. And we're going to have to deploy new routes, and some of that may be baked into images, but some of it will probably be a manual I won't say manual in the sense that it's not physically going and doing it, but through policy and things of the sort, and for driving automation, getting those routes trusted. I always look back at a couple of really interesting things that need to be taken into account, right? This is about using certificates at scale and having certificates represent identity, and not just identity of a person, but identity of a thing. It could be a piece of code, could be a container, could be an AI agent now, could be any number of things, right? But the reality is each one of those has to have a unique identity, right? And that identity has to be trusted. And in order to trust it, you have to be able to manage it. And in order to manage it, you have to have these elements of automation of knowing it was properly issued, knowing you can revoke it, knowing if you can replace it if something changes, knowing that you can manage the trust structure around it. And without all of those things being there, you really have to start to wonder, do I really have a handle on what's really going on? So if we look at some of the ways that organizations traditionally do some of this management outside of what I would call manual methods, right? But some of the protocols that are out there, like SCEP, like EST, like ACME, so on and so forth, they only do a part of it, right? They do maybe a provisioning and a replacement of a cert, but they don't do root of trust management, or they don't do, inline revocation, so on and so forth. So, all of these elements come together to really make certificates sort of fire and forget, for want of a better term, right? When automation is properly layered over top of everything else, you don't have to do things like Elon Musk had to do, like tweet out, oops, we took Starlink down because cert expired on our ground station. Or a few years ago, there was another outage with Nokia and SoftwareOne. We've seen Microsoft outages in Teams and O365. The reason I call those companies out, not that they're bad companies by any stretch of the imagination, but here we have an example of arguably one of the richest people in the world still not having invested at that time in certificate management, right? Not viewing that as an operational imperative, and the consequence is one has to say, "Oops, I made a mistake. This little certificate that nobody was watching expired and took my infrastructure out."
Right. Yeah, I think even extremely specialized companies that are well funded with talented people are still going to struggle,
Yep.
as the life cycle shrinks and as things get, more connected and complicated.
Absolutely.
It's a fair point. Let's touch on a little bit of what the potential benefits of CLM could be for for our audience here, and specifically what our survey respondents chose. And we see that compliance is, this actually is a little bit surprising for me, Chris, that compliance was, by far the biggest result.
Yeah, not for me, because like I mentioned earlier, right, when we were talking about those four things that are sort of leading into this conversation, right? Compliance was one of them. And the audit burden has definitely gone up for organizations. Multiple different pieces of legislation or regulation that most organizations are now impacted by. On a global basis, right? Especially when we're talking about global companies, or the compliance burden goes up. And when you've got a complete inventory, when you know where all your certs are, you know everything about them, and an auditor knocks on your door and says, "Hey, prove to me you're doing X," you absolutely when you're in a position where things are automated and you've got that visibility, you absolutely it lessens that burden. So,
Yeah.
I'd challenge anybody without a CLM layer to answer an auditor that says, hey, show me all your certificates are actually of this hashing algorithm, or of this of this cryptographic algorithm, or show me where all your certs are in the first place.
Right. Well, challenge is the right word, I think, because
Yeah.
they would need to attempt it anyway, and doing so, without an automated solution would take quite a bit of time.
Mhm.
All right, chapter 3, automation success strategies. This is where we get into the meat of the webinar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, we've got some pretty agreed upon tactics here, right? Start small, begin with your riskiest and most critical use cases, but that also injects a little bit of, a variable into it too, right? Not the risks are not going to be the same, and the most critical, workloads for each company are not going to be the same. And so, how do you reconcile, what looks like a very, kind of basic checklist with, the nuances of each organization, right?
Yeah, and I mean, again, this kind of comes back to having maybe a few too many years of practical experience. But every organization, I think you nailed it, Nathan, when you said every organization is going to be slightly different, and that's 100% correct, because I have yet to walk into Bank A and have them be the same as Bank B. Same goals, same objectives, completely different technology landscapes, right? And you have to, in this particular case, play to the technology landscape, and as you mentioned as well, to the risk. So it is really about uh, looking at that inventory once you've got that level of visibility, and then managing that against those things that present the greatest risk to your organization. They may not be obvious from day one, right? Good example would be if I'm a bank and my online banking infrastructure goes down, right? That's impactful. Don't disagree
Yeah.
at all with that. Now, what's the technology pinning that up? Is that the most important thing? Is that, the most impactful, say, to revenue? A lot of organizations would say, okay, what, if that goes down, that impacts revenue. That's a different conversation to have with our shareholders than if, I can't get something else for 15 minutes. Right. So really, looking at it, and then targeting the technology behind that. Right. So, hey, what are my load balancers? All of my load balancers have certs on them. Maybe that's a great place to automate. Right. Easy automation, existing. Here at Keyfactor, we've got the partnerships with all of the major players. That's kind of becomes a plug and play. Go forward. Talk to the group that runs load balancers and say, hey, we want to help you manage these because we want to prevent outages the same way that you want to prevent outages.
Mm-hmm.
It is really important that organizations sort of also remember that this is a cross-functional implementation. That absolutely, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about this. This impacts everybody in the organization. So get buy-in early on in the process to make sure you don't go, hey, I want to integrate this, CLM technology into your application or into your, domain of management, and that become the first time it's introduced when you're actually trying to do something. It's getting the buy-in early, and then most importantly, is have measurements, understand how, unrealistic measurements, how's the implementation of a properly run CLM infrastructure, properly implemented automation, how is it actually impacting your organization, and then how do you improve upon those metrics over time, so it becomes measurable. And when somebody says, hey, why are we doing this? You'll have the ability to say, we're doing this because here's the results.
Right. Yeah. It'll be a bit of a project, right? To understand, the contours of your organization and work between the groups, but, distilling to a measurement that you can sell to the board or to the C-suite is important.
Yeah,
And
and those don't have to be particularly complex, right? And I'll give you a good
sure.
example, Nathan, one that I saw recently with one of our colleagues. An organization that was looking to replace their publicly rooted PKI with a different vendor for their web server certs and TLS certs and things of the sort. Did an inventory and found that they had a lot of certs that didn't need to be publicly rooted. They could actually be privately rooted. right? One of the measurements that they can then go back to management with is say, hey, there's a cost savings here, right? We found a few hundred certs that we don't have to actually pay for because we're able to issue those off our internal PKI that has a much lower cost structure than a publicly rooted PKI. So yeah, there are very simple measurements that can come into play and into effect as well.
Right, right. And it's important to know too that you don't need to take our word for it. These are pretty shouted from the rooftop kind of steps towards automation. And Gartner, for example, is already briefing the executives on this exact topic. For the people in our audience, like Gartner is talking to the C-suite and to the board about this kind of stuff. They've seen a huge increase in people asking about certificate lifecycle management and automation. And somewhat related, to PQC, but the shrinking cert lifespan as well. So, they're seeing more interest, and I'm sure we are too from our customers, right, Chris?
Yeah, and I mean, people in your organization are absolutely getting their Gartner briefings, and this is becoming an increased area of conversation. You mentioned the PQC thing. This is building a foundation, right? That honestly, it's the same foundation that you can use over and over again. And this is why Gartner kind of looks at it as a unique area that they can provide advice in. Because it is building a foundation of build once, build properly, then repeatedly use. Change in certificates are coming as a result of PQC. You've got the shortening lifespans. You've got things that you don't even know yet, right? You're going to eventually have to deprecate RSA and ECC out of your environment. You're going to have new sets of algorithms coming at you. NIST approved 3 of them last year, but they're looking at another 16 potential algorithms into the next few years. There's going to be activities and events that are just going to make managing certificates really, really hard without this layer of visibility and automation.
Right, exactly. And I think we actually have a relevant question or two in the chat, Chris, if specifically about Acme credentials and about replacing root of trust for our mobile app. Is that something that you want to touch on now, or can we pause until the end for those?
Yeah, so I'll take the mobile app one because that's a really tough one to specifically, because it depends what the mobile app is running on, right? Android does it differently than iOS, so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, the traditional way of doing that in a mobile app, of course, is updates to the app, assuming that the root trust is built into the app in the first place. Where you can use a common trust store, then you can manage that trust store separately through other types of management. But if you're it changes whether it's a corporate app or whether it's a public facing app on the different approaches that can be taken there. So it is a very complex one to go after. Most organizations simply build trust into the app, and unfortunately an app update is the way it's typically done until we get to a point where you can actually do all this stuff as an abstraction layer, and we're not there yet. We're still trying to figure out in some mobile apps how to deal with PQC, for instance. So much more pressing problem.
Right. Yeah. And if I could also address the other question, if Mauricio asked if we'll share the presentation, yes, we will. We will share it. It'll be available on demand after we finish up. And I think that's a great spot to ask our second and last poll question. What are some obstacles that might prevent your company from automating CLM right now? We can say, or we can show, I'm sorry, do we have the results? Well, we can add append the results to the on-demand version, but I do recall that lack of internal expertise in automation was our number one most answered result on the survey, Chris, followed very closely by competing business priorities, and which was tied with concerns about access controls and approvals, which is, of course, a risk concern. So these shouldn't really surprise us. And if we look at the poll right now, let's see.
We're getting some answers in there. So it looks like we're locked in between competing business priorities and difficulty integrating automated systems. Wait a minute, competing business priorities just pulled ahead. I feel like I'm following a race or something here. But not surprisingly, yeah, it's hard to again, outside of a compelling event for change, it's sometimes hard to get focus on why this is important, because people tend to not fix the problem that's not there. But when there is a compelling event, it's incredibly painful and incredibly expensive to fix, and hopefully that drives a conversation. So it's really about how do you turn that conversation from, we had an outage, it cost us X number of dollars or whatever in the root cause analysis, to, hey, let's have a conversation about not having an outage, right?
Right.
So it's really changing that around, so it becomes proactive versus reactive.
Yeah, and that's the the next subject we're going to touch on, right? Which is how do we flip the script?
Yep.
So buy-in, right? That's a very critical part, probably the most important part if you're actually trying to get automation off the ground. Somebody eventually needs to give permission to integrate the tool, to buy the tool, right? So what do they care about? And it is a matter of understanding the role of the person you're trying to convince, and what they care about for their job, and understanding the up the chain outcomes that could occur, the higher level outcomes for not having the type of outage prevention and manual work prevention that automation provides, right?
Yeah, and it also comes down to, hey, let's just, like I said before, let's build a foundation, right? Let's build a foundation of just better certificate hygiene inside of the organization. Let's realize that what we have is put together with duct tape and popsicle sticks, and I'm sure our audience would agree that if they could go back and do PKI all over again from the ground up, a lot of you probably inherited this from somebody else's work, but the reality is, if you could start all over, you'd probably bake better automation, certificate lifecycle management into the initial design. One of the negatives about PKI is it's hard to go back and make it better, because it's only as secure as you've maintained it from day one. And you can only take trust away, you can't add trust in. Good news is you can add in automation, you can add in certificate lifecycle management. Those can be retrofitted without degrading the overall security of the infrastructure. But it requires coming back to this, right? Everybody to be on the same page. And I said it before, one of the places that I see automation breakdown is when you're trying to deploy it cross-functionally into different organizations, but you haven't introduced it ahead of time. So it does require that kind of overarching CISO or higher level, director, VP type of role to say, yes, this is what we are doing, and here's the reason why we're doing it, and here's the measurement against which we will know whether it's adding the value it's supposed to or not. And I'm very confident in every organization that ultimately deploys automation, even if it's only to one group of assets, the benefit is absolutely there on the day that project is complete and on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, definitely. And as they say, money talks, right? It talks loudest. And if you're able to say, my team costs less now, that's a pretty powerful way to sell.
And so I will say yes, but I'm gonna respectfully disagree a little bit on some of that. Right? There's two different ways to do this. There's commercial software, or build your own. Right? People have tried to do certificate automation and build their own CLM layers, and the reality is that becomes very expensive over time. Right? You want to look to a commercial solution that supports all the integrations for your organization. So the F5s, the NetScalers, this, that, the other thing that has support built in, that isn't custom code that you've constantly got to maintain, so on and so forth. Because if you do go down the road of trying to do something that's 100% open source and you've got to maintain all that code, then that takes away from some of your flexibility and some of your repurposing of your work in order to be able to meet that, those objectives of lowering costs, so on and so forth.
Yeah. And I do want to touch on that just a bit, because you can quantify this for for the people who are interested. It's when you're talking about helping your higher up stakeholders face the facts, it's important to frame it pretty simply. Not just how many certificates you manage or how many outages you had, but what's the impact when something inevitably does happen, and is the price of preventing that higher than the price of the impact itself? And the answer is usually no, and especially as the certificate life cycle shrinks even further. The shortening life cycle is driving up renewal volume very quickly, as you can see from our exercise here. When you consider that it takes about 45 or maybe even an hour to manually renew a certificate, generating the CSR, submitting to the certificate authority, receiving the certificate, installing it, testing it, validating it, restarting the service, and auditing it. It's it's pretty realistic.
And I think probably the biggest piece in there that you haven't mentioned is going through change control and getting the approvals to operationally actually deploy that certificate. Yeah. A lot of cases tends to take even longer, but how long is a piece of string? Well, it depends how long your piece of string is, but yeah, I think 60 minutes is a conservative amount of time within large organizations to go through all that process.
Yeah, as is 1,000 public certificates, right? We've seen we have customers with many more, right?
Yep.
And with sorry, I'll move on here just because we're running short on time.
Yeah, and I think I think the thing that needs to be called out on your previous slide, and no need to go back to it, is that's just one use case, right? That's just shortening lifespans. That's not everything that you can benefit from with automation. That's just that one particular use case. So if you can realize a cost savings and an effort saving in that one use case, imagine what you could do across multiple use cases inside of your organization and the type of return on investment it could bring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you already spoke to this too as well. It's about laying a base for the now, using the technology that we have now and the the life cycle that we're about to see.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it's like I said, measurement is very important. That's how you're going to show your organization you've been successful in this project, and that's not just necessarily ROI, but ROI tends to be a part of it, right? And make sure that you have awareness of overcoming that resistance, right? It is going to happen inside of the organization when you walk up to somebody and say, I would like to have automation take over this job that you're currently doing or this role that you're currently fulfilling in, managing certificates on XYZ, and having their buy-in in advance is usually the difference between let's sit down and talk about how that's going to look versus, get out of my office.
Yeah, and this might not be the best way to approach it either, but also to say like, well, look, everyone else is automated. Why not me, right? Because there are some things out there that it would be ridiculous if they weren't automated already.
Oh yeah, I mean, and look at other examples inside the organization. Your configuration management is automated. Your virus definitions, your Windows updates, everything is automated. So why are certificates not? Right? I mean, they're critical infrastructure as well. They're core to the success of the organization doing business securely. But why are they sort of not considered for this type of investment in order to make sure that the organization continues to be secure and safe?
Yeah. Yeah, Chris, wrap us up if you can.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think what I want people to understand is it is possible to automate, right? A lot of folks say, hey, it's a difficult thing to do. We saw in some of those survey results, some of the particulars, but it is possible to do it. It does need to be, sort of one bite at a time. If you try to do everything all at once, that makes it infinitely more difficult. There is change in the industry that is coming, right? The 47-day certs are certainly one of them. There's changes going on right across the organization. And as we said, we've seen outages happen with large organizations and small organizations alike prior to them taking on this effort of automating certificate lifecycle management. And they will continue to happen. And even the biggest organizations like the Microsofts of the world, have outages due to certificates and sort of have to go, oops, our bad. And we would like everybody on this webinar to not have to be in that situation. So hence why we're having the conversation. And
Yep.
last but not least is get that buy-in. I cannot state that enough. I feel like a broken record sometimes. For those of you who remember what a record is, it's you've got to get the buy-in above and around in order to be successful. Because this will become an organizational conversation that needs to take place. And as you go and you sort of stretch out from your core of things that you're automating initially, and then move on to the bigger ecosystem where certs can be automated and into cloud infrastructure and so on and so forth, you're going to need that cooperation with other teams in the organization to be successful. And it's really about them understanding what you want to do and understanding what the benefit is to them of having more time dealing with the with the core of their business versus running around and trying to do operational certificate management stuff.
Right. Absolutely. And at Keyfactor, we want to help you guys to to take on this challenge. And so we've got a couple of resources here. You can find them pinned on the right side in the attachments menu. But we have our newest edition of the Digital Trust magazine. This one is entirely about automation. So if you enjoyed the webinar, you'll definitely enjoy this. We also have something not listed here on the slide, but our CLM maturity model, which is an amazing resource. And as always, if you want a demo, if you want to connect with either me or Chris on LinkedIn, we would love to chat and to link up.
Absolutely, and more to the point, if you're also an F1 or a racing car fan, that automation edition maps things back to automobile racing, which is something I'm very passionate about. So, I think it's worth a read anyway. So.
Right. So if you want to talk with Chris about F1, that's another reason to connect with him on LinkedIn.
That is another reason to connect with me on LinkedIn. Awesome.
And yeah, thank you. I see we don't have any additional questions right now. But thank you everybody for being here. It's been really nice.
Yep. I appreciate the time, and as always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks again. Bye.